What's up, everyone? Welcome to BuzzBeat. We are live here on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter video, I believe, and Twitter Spaces. The Hornets did finish up Summer League play this weekend with a win. They ended on a high note. But on this episode, we're going to speak on some of these rumors that have been floating around and how this offseason is shaking out. I am Richie, and I'll be joined by Brian today. There's a slight chance that Spencer joins us via Twitter Spaces, but we will see about that. As we get into this, be sure, as always, to give us a rating and review on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. I've actually been seeing the ratings go up past couple of days. It's kind of gone up like 4 or 5 ratings, but we still love to see those written reviews as well. We haven't seen one of those in a while. And lastly, subscribe to us on YouTube so you can catch our shows live like this one. And BG, how's it going? I saw you watch the Hornets game on Saturday. I can admit I did not do that. I did not spend my Saturday watching that one.
Yeah, you didn't miss too much, although I guess it was sort of the best team game, probably the most efficient offensive performance they had all season. As far as like what was probably worthwhile to pull out of that, one, it was good getting to see Leonard Miller get some reps with Minnesota and Wendell Moore Jr., who I covered at Duke and liked a lot, first round pick from a year ago. He looked okay. Not amazing in that game. And then getting to watch Amari Bailey and James Nagy as far as the Hornets go, that was actually like made it slightly worth my time. But yeah, you ever have one of those days where like, especially with what, like for watching a game where you sort of like set up your afternoon around or your evening or whatever on watching this game. And as soon as you turn it on, and you realize just how many guys are not playing or someone's out that night or someone's out that afternoon, you're like, I probably would have structured my day differently if I had known that, no Brandon Miller, no Nick Smith, no Kai Jones, no James Bouknight, like basically all of the former first round picks, no Bryce McGowan's, like they were with a pretty, with a lot of the, G League type, Exhibit 10 type guys getting playing time in this game. But still cool to see Bailey and Najee, who I think, agree with me on this. Were those guys that Charlotte's two best players in preseason?
Yeah, I think Najee for sure. I think Bailey, because he didn't see a lot of minutes, it was hard to kind of see him play on a consistent level. I wish he played a little bit more often. But in terms of like from, game one until how many games they play? 7, I guess, technically.
Yeah,
Throughout the course.
7. Yeah.
I only watched 6 of those. But yeah, I would say that those two guys probably impressed me the most. I think James Bouknight was probably the most disappointing. Kai Jones was hit or miss. I even think Bryce McGowan's was hit or miss at times. Like there was times where he showed flashes, but there were times where it almost like he was locked into himself and not playing team basketball. But that was probably like the least impactful game because that was like the seeding game, and obviously, I think the final game is tomorrow or Monday, I guess, depending on when you're listening to this. The final game for the Vegas Summer League is going to be taking place soon. So, all right. Let's start this episode with some rumors. We'll start with the one from Hoops Hype, Michael Scotto. He mentions that the Hornets are looking for a backup point guard, a veteran point guard to be exact. He states that the 31-year-old Delon Wright of the Wizards could be a trade target for Charlotte. Wright does have a contract of $8.2 million. And I could be wrong. I feel like we've had a conversation about Delon Wright before, at least last offseason, just kind of briefly mentioned him in passing as a guy that could fill that void as the backup point guard. I think he is someone that you kind of look at his profile, you watch him play. He brings some noticeable skills that will be obvious right away. And if they're looking for someone that is a veteran, he has been around the league. He is older, so this could fit the bill that Mitch Kupchak is going for. But you do know what you're getting with him. He's a guy that likes to get to the rim. He can finish through contact, draw fouls. He does finish some really difficult shots as well. I was just watching some clips of him this morning, and a lot of scoop shots, high off the glass. He's not much of a perimeter shooter, but he is better than DSJ on that end. But where you're going to get most of the value with Delon Wright is just, pest on ball, getting steals, anticipating passing lanes. And he's very good at one thing I noticed, like he digs down a lot off ball and gets the steal that way. And he's got height on him. He's not like he's 6'2" or 6'3". He's probably closer to what, 6'4", 6'5", if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken.
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure why the Wizards want to make this trade. I guess they're just trying to get younger, but he's only tied up for one more year, I believe. So it's not like they're having to hold on to this guy for too much longer. But what do you think of trading for a veteran like Wright?
Well, I have a couple of different thoughts. One, yes, like we have definitely talked about Richie Delon Wright at some point in the past. Like as it turns out, when the team you cover is searching for a backup point guard for like the 7th consecutive offseason, that you tend to end up recycling names. Like how many times have we talked about Seth Curry or Delon
Yeah.
Wright? I mean, it's just in the post Jeremy Lin era has just been like completely uh taken away by the fact that this team just could not nail down the backup point guard position. And maybe there was some way that at some point they could have transitioned Devonte Graham to that, but ultimately he ends up going out in a sign and trade about 2 years ago to the Pelicans, which none of the pick that got them Mark Williams. It's a rare moment of like good deal craft by this front office. um Wright, would obviously play a role very similar to Dennis Smith Jr. And you
Mhm.
could see him as someone that Steve Clifford would like a lot, right? Like the 6'5" screen navigator, steal artist in the, maybe even in the Michael Carter Williams type role. The Cliff liking that length in event creation at the point of attack defensively. And DeLon Wright, like he's got some interesting steals numbers, 3.7% steal rate last year. It's really good. And in each of the last 3 seasons, each year with a steal rate of at least 3%. Never been a great 3-point shooter, but on relatively low volume, 37% from deep over the last 4 seasons. So he's improved on that end. From Washington's perspective, I would say if they could get anything for this guy that they're clearly not going to bring back a year from now, that would be like a huge, huge win for them, which then brings me to the flip side. Like, as far as trading for DeLon Wright, you know, trading for him, as far as that goes, again, a couple of thoughts here. I like Wright as a player, but like needing to shell out any sort of draft assets, depending on, depending on what the Hornets would do with Kelly Oubre or PJ, I guess in theory, they could just have Washington trade him into their cap space and then send, a couple of second round picks or a second round pick, hopefully heavily protected, to Washington. But, I don't know why Washington would give him away unless they thought they were going to get some type of asset in return. Not to beat a dead horse, this all could have been avoided if they just drafted Scoot Henderson. Like you wouldn't have to figure out the backup point guard position. You could play he and LaMelo together and then platoon them, and then let Scoot be the guy that would organize and run the second unit. It was right there. They chose not to do it. And now they're gonna have to figure out the backup point guard role in a different way.
Hey, what do you think about this trade? Is this too much, too little?
Are you thinking now? I guess the other options would be like you could point at like Book Knight, Kai Jones, or
Okay.
JT Thor, right? Like
Yeah,
all of those guys are possibilities. I guess I don't.
it was the first one you mentioned, Book Night.
Yeah, Book Knight. So yeah, what's your full proposal? Is it just Book Knight for DeLon
Well, okay,
Wright straight up?
if you can get away with just Book Night, I would do it. And
Oh yeah, I would do that too. I mean, in a vacuum, it's not amazing return to take a lottery pick 2 years removed
right,
and then
right.
flip them for a 1-year rental of a backup point guard who is, like who knows how many games he would even swing for Charlotte next season. But yes, Book Knight is one of the guys who it's like if Hornets, they need to check this box, they need a backup guard. You can see the defensive minded role for Wright. If it's just Book Knight, I don't love that, but I think I could stomach that one.
Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
proposed trade. Just the way that he's been playing, it just doesn't. He doesn't really inspire any kind of hope moving forward. Yes, he was a lottery pick. Yes, he was a first round pick, and you're trading for a guy that's 31 years old and may only be on your team for one more season. So it doesn't feel like that's the way to go. But I also don't have a lot of hope that Book Knight is going to turn it around. I mentioned on a previous episode, like he might improve by having a change of scenery, but I don't think he's going to
Mhm.
improve to the point where the Hornets might regret that. So who knows if the Wizards even value Book Knight? They probably have seen, just what we've seen as well. It's
Yeah.
not really moving the needle all that much unless you just feel like you can kind of, reestablish himself as a guy that needs a change of scenery type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, my guess would be that they have a lot of other young players on the roster that already are
Yeah.
a priority above him. It would be kind of funny to have Book Knight and Johnny Davis together on the same roster. Davis, another recent lottery pick that had a pretty bumpy rookie season. I like Davis a lot as a prospect. I hope things turn around for him. Even as the Wizards are going through a bit of a transition this offseason post Beal. But yeah, I mean, like if you could satisfy the backup point guard spot and all it cost you was Book Night, like ultimately I think that's fine. I mean, I guess you could do this with Kai Jones too. And just given how crowded the
Yeah.
center room is for the Hornets, like there's no pathway for like playing time for Kai this year, like almost none, barring an injury to Mark Williams or Nick Richards. I don't think Kai played particularly well in summer league, but he's still at that size. He still has, he is still a very impressive and fluid athlete. So like you and I talked about Kai a couple of weeks ago, Richie. Like I think he's going to continue to hold value around the league, even post Charlotte, simply because that length, that athleticism will buy him, I think, more than one opportunity in terms of different franchises that are willing to sort of take a shot at him. Thor would be pretty close to off limits for
Yeah.
me. Like he's too scalable. He's already like a quasi rotation player for this team. He's still really young. He's the youngest guy of that 2021 draft class. And like, especially depending on what happens with PJ, like Thor could have even more value within the roster going forward. So he would be untouchable for me. I would at least hear the possibility of Kai or Book Night. Again, that's not awesome value moving a first round pick, and one of which was a future lottery pick, potentially just to get a rental at backup point guard. I would be very hesitant to move draft capital. Like the Hornets don't really have like
A ton of
they
seconds moving forward, though.
no, they owe a lot out. Like
Yeah.
they really do. Like I was actually going through this earlier today. Like they owe a 2024 second round pick to either Portland or OKC. They owe a 2025 second round pick to Golden State. And right now, speaking of Kai Jones, the draft night trade that they made in 2021, that future first, which has now been moved around several times. It was New York, then it was Atlanta, now San Antonio. Like that's lottery protected for each of the next two drafts in 2024 and 2025. If it doesn't convey in 2025, then it as a first round pick, then it becomes 2 seconds in 2025 and 2026. They have some seconds coming in, but only three. So again, I wouldn't be like I wouldn't be so flip with these things. Like it wouldn't be unless it was like top 55 protected. You know what I mean? Like in which case, then I don't know why Washington would really be even interested in such a move.
Yeah. And I think one of the easier ways that they could have just solved this problem, because if you're trading, obviously you're going to have to give up some kind of assets for Delon Wright. And I think Delon Wright would be perfectly fine in the situation here as a backup point guard. But if the Hornets had just re-signed Dennis Smith Jr. and how that situation played
Yes.
out, because in the same article on Hoops Hype, it was noted that Charlotte offered him more than the minimum, but also hinted that DSJ had a greater opportunity to play in Brooklyn. So I'm not really entirely sure what that means in terms of more than the minimum. That could mean a whole lot of things. I actually got the sense that DSJ enjoyed it here in Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
I personally would have loved to see him retained because of everything he brought to this team, especially on the defensive side of the court. I think in Brooklyn, he may have a bigger opportunity, but they've still got Dinwiddie, and who knows what Ben Simmons is doing over there. But, it's not like he wouldn't have full reign over this second unit here in Charlotte, but
Yeah.
maybe he sees something that I just don't. I also think what swayed DSJ it was how quickly and how much interest Brooklyn showed in him. And I do wonder if Charlotte lacked a little bit of that aggression in trying to persuade him to stay. They probably didn't spend much time thinking about, hey, okay, how are we going to negotiate to keep this backup point guard on our team? And like I said, it could have been for the biannual. Like if Charlotte could have offered the biannual, which would have been 4.5 million, which was more than I believe the Nets offered him,
Would be
or
almost double what
okay,
Brooklyn offered him, you know?
or they could have just offered him the non-bird exception, which is 120% of his minimum salary, which is 3 million, which I believe is still above what Brooklyn offered. So I think ultimately why DSJ left was two reasons. One, maybe he thought he had a better shot at playing in Brooklyn. And then number two, I think that the Nets really impressed him with the way that they showed early signs of interest. Charlotte could have offered more. They did offer more, but I guess they just didn't seem like they were too aggressive in trying to keep him in Charlotte.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a, it was a nice job by Charlotte's front office to find Dennis Smith
Right.
and to sort of rehab him. And he turned into a really nice player and was, I think, one of the best like guard defenders, point of attack defenders, and screen navigators in the league last season. And he got steals in a bunch of different ways as well. So it's tough to see him like turn back into a real player and then for Charlotte to just lose it for nothing. Like, I mean, it's like as someone that roots for Dennis Smith and covered him in college at State, I'm happy to see him finding a pathway to being, a real NBA player again after some tough years following his rookie season with the Mavs. But for Charlotte to lose that for nothing is tough. And now they're out, with McDaniels going, being traded to Philadelphia. Now he signed, I think, with Toronto this offseason. I mean, Charlotte's out its two best perimeter defenders from a season ago. Not like they were like a good perimeter defensive team, but like, they lost their two best perimeter defenders and they got what did they get out of it? Like what did they get from McDaniels and in DSJ? That's not like great business. And which just brings me back very briefly to the Delon Wright hypothetical. Like ultimately it's bad business if you're giving up any sort of draft capital for a 1-year rental of a veteran point guard. And if they determine that like Wright's the target, they talk business with Washington, the price is too high. I think the Hornets should just say, whatever, we'll go try to sign someone off the scrap heap, or just like we'll let Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward run the second unit. Like that's way better than like lighting another second round pick on fire. What I would say is that I thought about this a couple of days ago with DSJ. One, like they're going to have an awesome defensive unit next season. Like Dennis Smith Jr., Mikal Bridges, Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neal, Nick Claxton. I mean, that like they're like a sneaky, awesome defensive team. And just in terms of like really, really like not just like good defenders and, scheme guys that are like good within a scheme, like those dudes are all awesome regardless of scheme. But they project to be a team that could be very, very good switching and very, very versatile with how they want to guard, ball screens with Nick Smith and Dennis Smith Jr. Like, I think there's a good chance that like he starts for this team next year. I mean, like you look at you mentioned Spencer Dinwiddie, but like the other guards on this roster, like Cam Thomas can get hot and score. They signed Lonnie Walker this offseason. I mean, I guess Ben Simmons is still there if you think of him as a point guard, or as, if he's still going to actually play next year, we'll see. But basically, like, I think there's a pathway to DSJ starting,
That's true.
which, like, if you're Brooklyn and you just signed a really good defensive point guard who might start for you at what, 2.6 million dollars, like that's a steal for Brooklyn. He gives him a rim pressure guy, which will be a nice fit next to Mikal Bridges. So I could see why he would like that. It gets to run empty corner pick and roll. That seems like a really good, like the Dennis Smith Jr., Nick Richards empty corner pick and roll, or DSJ, Mark Williams empty corner pick and roll. Those are really good actions for the Hornets this season, and now he'll get to do that with Nick Claxton while the floor is spaced by Bridges, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith. And what I would think for a guy like Dennis Smith Jr., like if he ever, maybe he wavered on the confidence with this at some point, and perhaps he got it back last season, but that's a guy that probably wants to be a starter in the NBA and sees a pathway to him getting back to being a starter. And even if only he's only in Brooklyn for a short period of time, it's like if he becomes a starter again and plays well within that, then all of a sudden, like maybe the perception changes even league wide. And now all of a sudden it's not just, oh, hey, Dennis Smith Jr. is like a nice like reserve guard and like a good defender, but maybe teams see him as someone that can also start. And if he starts for Brooklyn and they make the play in and Brooklyn gets the 8th seed, or like you could just see how it could boost his it could boost his value or perception league wide or whatever. So maybe that's another reason why he went for it. And there was just no way to him becoming the starter in the short term in Charlotte with LaMelo and Rozier right there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe he was swayed by the fact that there could be potential for him to start, but that'd be crazy if you had a starting point guard like him at $2.5 million. It's a steal. It's a steal, not because like he's the best starting point guard, but because you're playing him on a minimum contract. And it feels like, wasn't there a previous Hornet player that boosted his career in Charlotte, then went on to Brooklyn?
Yes.
Yes.
We named him about 15 minutes ago on this podcast too, I feel like.
But yeah, that leaves us with where the Hornets go from here, because the point guard or the backup point guard position is still very iffy. You mentioned Rozier, a guy that could, stagger minutes, be the backup point guard. Do they try to trade for Delon Wright? Do they try to go out and sign a guy like Ayo Dosunmu? That doesn't seem like that's heading in that type of direction. It's funny. On Twitter the other day, I put out like my way too early rotation for the Hornets, and I was getting a lot of pushback, or not a lot, I would say some pushback, that Nick Smith Jr. should be getting more minutes to help run that second unit. I personally don't think, one, that's his natural position, nor do I think he's ready for that. And there's only so many minutes that can go around with a rotation. So I'm not sure he is the answer. Maybe they might try him here or there. So, Brian, my question to you, I guess, maybe a prediction of what they're going to do, and what would you do if you were in their position? Because to me, as it's kind of creeping, obviously the offseason is not over yet, but as like some of the major moves have already happened, I tend to think it's either going to be Rozier is going to be the backup point guard and, split his time with the starters, or I do kind of see this trade for Delon Wright, something like that. I would assume I've kind of ruled him out. I just don't know if that's really going to be the way that they go.
Yeah, I mean he would be a really nice pickup, but I do like Ayo, even with his sort of limitations offensively. And yeah, no, also part of this report, maybe we mentioned it at some point and I just missed it, but apparently the Hornets were trying to get in on Aaron Holiday, who ended up signing with the Rockets. I mean, you could see it's the same. They're looking for cheap backup point guard, which again, nothing new here. I mean, it's funny. I saw when you mentioned Richie, when you mentioned you're like way too early projected rotation for next season. I did like the Hayward in 6-man role. Like that is something that I don't know if you remember, but if you go back 2 seasons to the 21-22 season when Hayward was out during the middle of the year and Bridges and PJ were playing together at the 3 and 4. Plumlee was in at the starting 5. Like one of the things I proposed was Hayward coming back and being in the 6-man role. Like that's the lineup, right? Like it's just with Mark Williams in for Mason Plumlee, but that would have been LaMelo, Rozier, Bridges, PJ, and center plus Hayward coming off the bench. Like I definitely don't mind. I mean, kind of like the possibility of Nick Smith getting some reps at backup point guard. I don't know how it would go. I think he had some flashes at Summer League and some flashes at Arkansas, even though he wasn't like their primary initiator. But it wouldn't be bad to just throw him into the deep end and see how that goes. Um, Especially because like I don't think I think the front office and coaching staff is going to push for the playoffs, but like this is not a playoff team. So, but I wouldn't mind seeing Hayward in that role. Um, I don't know. Like, I guess there might be some other trades out there that we're not seeing. Someone in the comments mentioned a Darion Sebron trade for backup point guard. I mean, that would be amazing. I don't think New Orleans is looking to move him. I know they've got a lot of guards. If anything, I think New Orleans would be more interested in moving Kyra Lewis Jr., who we've talked about as like an interesting second draft player and someone that I wouldn't with his speed. I would be interested in. But I think even to trade Sebron, unless I have this wrong, I think like New Orleans would have to convert. Like he's on a 2-way deal right now too. So like I I'm not like as far as the physical
Right.
mechanics behind trading for someone like that. I'm not 100% how that goes, but that would possibly. I mean, again, I just don't. Sebron would be incredible, but my guess is that New Orleans is gonna. I mean, they have a play. I think they have a player there. And if I'm the Pels, I would be wanting to try to find minutes for him somehow, some way. I know they've got a lot of guards and wings, so it might be tough. But I don't know. Do you have any? Is there any like veteran guard in the free agent pool that has piqued your interest, Richie, or someone that you would at least kick the can on?
No, I've not taken a real deep look at the free agent point guard list other than IU. So
Yeah.
I
What about is Kemba? Is Kemba still around?
yeah, I'm not sure his knees are going to hold up.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, that would be I wouldn't even think about that. I guess what were the other names that were floating out? Isaiah Thomas, John Wall, like those were some of the names that
Yeah.
across
Yeah.
was as veteran guys that could fill that role. It's funny the guest that we had on Saturday, Darian, Trust the Buzz. He says that like if you were to acquire a veteran player, he wants them to play, not just be a guy that's like on the sidelines. And I don't. I mean, I could see it going either way. I think having a veteran guy on the sidelines just as important as a guy that's out there playing. But I think the Hornets rotation roster seems to be pretty solidified outside of that backup point guard position. I think when it all comes down to it, I would not be surprised if they never acquire one. I really wouldn't.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
could try Nick Smith Jr. They could try Rozier and just kind of configure it to where they have enough ball handlers and playmakers
Mhm.
on the court at all times to where it just doesn't make a whole lot of difference. So
Yeah, like with Bridges and in Hayward, Smith, there's Rozier, obviously. I guess Book Night if he's still there and like actually in the rotate. Like there's enough ball handling, quasi ball handling to like I think piece it together. But yeah, if you could get right for a cheap trade, I guess then it's worth it. But there aren't it doesn't seem like there's a lot of great options to sort of be nimble in that transaction.
all right, the final rumor that I would like to get to is the one that Jake Fisher reported over at Yahoo Sports. And he says PJ Washington has not drawn an offer from the Hornets that reaches Isaiah Stewart, that is, a salary figure, sources said, of $16 million per season. So to me, when I read this was not a good sign for the way that the Hornets view PJ. And they know that he's at the mercy of other teams in terms of the market and how it's dried up, because I'm sure.
We talked about that last week
Yeah.
too, Richie.
So if some team throws that standard MLE his way, 12.4 million, Charlotte would match that in a heartbeat. So I don't think that's the route that it's going to take. I also think, and I don't even know if I don't know if PJ wants 16 million that matches Isaiah, or if he wants more. So the way that this report comes out, it sounds like he wants 16, but I almost view it as he could typically, want more. He just hasn't received that type of offer yet. Um, I have my thoughts on how this will play out, but BG, what do you feel about this, and how do you think the situation ultimately plays out with PJ?
It's pretty disappointing. I mean, we've talked about this a lot the last few weeks. We've talked about PJ a lot the last 4 years, but this is a guy who hasn't even turned 25 yet. He's been in Charlotte's rotation since day one, former lottery pick. He's played a bunch of different roles for Charlotte. He showed even some new stuff in terms of his development during his 4th season last year. He's a good two-way player. He can shoot, gives you a little rim protection. He can switch some, good team defender, good ball mover. Say what you his own sort of like one-on-one playmaking is pretty up and down, but it's not like it's something he's just like totally incapable of doing. But when you put him into a pretty serious, like a pretty narrow like catch and shoot or ball mover role, he can be very, very efficient. And if you ask him to do more, he can do that. He can do that too. He's shown the ability to do a lot of different stuff as a screener, and think about all the stuff that can do for you offensively as a team with LaMelo Ball or a team, with Brandon Miller. But PJ's shown himself, I think, to be a good screener. He doesn't have a ton of gravity as a diver, but he can do that. He can pick and pop. He can short roll and make plays out of the short roll, make passing reads out of the short roll. I would much rather have, like, if you could get if you could get PJ Washington on the same contract as Isaiah Stewart, like I'd rather have PJ Washington. I know Beef Stew, like I like Beef Stew, and he's shown some shooting capability too, and he looks like a guy that's probably maybe more likely to play the 4 going forward, whether it's in Detroit or elsewhere. So again, you can see some of the similarities between he and PJ, who's sort of has split time at the 4 and 5 throughout his career, but is probably long term a stretch 4. But it's really disappointing, like to see this playing out this way. I totally get the thought process, and Richie, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. Like, I get the thought process of playing a little hardball or whatever, because you can look out, you can see the market. There's no team with cap space that's lining up to throw PJ a big offer. And if anyone wants to hit him with the MLE, like they know the Hornets can match that immediately. So like,
Yep.
why would a team even try to do that? But for PJ, this is like his first opportunity to get paid. There was no extension last summer, and he's seen guys on this roster drafted after him in the same draft, Cody Martin, and guys drafted a year after him, in Richards. Those guys get new contracts or get extensions with this team, and he hasn't been taken care of. I absolutely think PJ is someone that's worth 16, 17, 18 million dollars a year. Charlotte can certainly afford it. I think if you signed him to one of those types of deals, you could still trade it a year from now, 2 years from now, if you really felt like you had to do it. But I think he just fits so perfectly with LaMelo and Mark Williams and just really any type of roster you want to put around him. He's so malleable because of his shooting and team defense and length, and versatility and strength, that like it feels like you could play him pretty much anywhere. So I don't know why Charlotte wouldn't just say, hey, this guy's young, he's good, he's been with us for a while, he's already played in a lot of games with us, he's played in a lot of fourth quarters with us, he plays both sides of the floor well, which is something you can say about few, if any, other players on the roster. Why wouldn't you just take care of him and bring him back? Like it's again, I get the thought process, but I get the thought process for wanting to play hardball or be judicious about it, like however you want to describe it. Like I get it, but it doesn't feel like this is a team that's really like in a position to be doing something like that. And this guy's good, homegrown player, former lottery pick, one of your rare draft success stories of this front office. Like, I just don't know why you wouldn't. I just don't know why you wouldn't try to take care of him and bring him back at a number that makes sense for both team and player. But yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about Richie? Where are you after? How did this report hit you the other day?
Yeah, I ultimately, and I get what you're saying, and I've said it too. It's like the leverage And Evan, we'll get to you in the speaker request real quick after I kind of get my thoughts. I think the leverage obviously is on Charlotte's side. They know what they're doing, and they don't seem to be budging. But I do think that there's like a human element to this, in terms of, if you're not willing to kind of meet in the middle with PJ, you probably just don't view this guy as a long-term piece. And that's when I start to wonder if they just kind of played this thing wrong. Like if you had no intentions, even last summer, no intentions of extending him, and you're going into the season and you watch him play after month after month after month, and your evaluation is, yeah, I'm not really confident that this guy's a long-term piece. Now I'm starting to wonder, did they even handle the deadline right? Did they mishandle that? Now, I'm not saying that I would have traded PJ. I'm just saying, with the way that this is playing out, there's a human element to this, to where PJ might come into the season and kind of in the back of his mind that this might be his last in Charlotte. If he signs that qualifying offer for just one season, which I actually think is a very strong possibility. And I mentioned on a previous episode.
Yo, Richie, real quickly,
Yep.
does my mic sound okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, your mic is sounding weird on my end, and I'm actually hearing some people in the comments also say your mic is sounding a little off right now. Sorry for interrupting there.
Oh gosh, is it still sounding that way?
Yeah, unfortunately, still sounding that way.
Well, let me pass it to Evan in the speaker request, and Evan, you can go ahead and take over here as my mic tries to get fixed.
Okay, your mic sounded fine to me, but hopefully my mic's working as well. You guys hit all hit the nail on the head. You hit all the points. I agree with you guys. I understand that the Hornets do have most of the leverage here in position, but you also have to understand that PJ does have some of the leverage as well in terms of just accepting that and playing on that qualifying offer. I don't know what that number is. You guys might have a better idea. I'm assuming it's somewhere like around where Miles was, so north of like whatever, 9 to 10 million. Just potentially having him and Bridges both play on the qualifying offer and potentially both leaving after the season is just, it sucks from a basketball perspective, and it just sucks from a fan perspective, like you guys were saying, in terms of bringing back your own homegrown guys. In terms of, I know we're talking about Cody Martin and Nick Richards, but real lottery guys that you want to build around. That's LaMelo, obviously. I think the last one that I can remember them bringing back was it possible it was MKG, like when they brought back MKG Zeller, and it goes hand in hand with the bad drafting. But just from a fan perspective, it just sucks to see your homegrown guys, the guys that you root for a few years, draft time lottery, and like you said, finally hit, not major hit, but a nice role player that you hit on, maybe more than a role player, to potentially have those guys going is just stink for the fan base. So I'm still hoping that when push does come to shove, and he will accept that qualifying offer, I'm hoping they can work something out. Like you guys said, I would love to give him the beach too money. I would go up to 18 comfortably. I would even go up to 20 if I needed to, if I really thought that he would sign the qualifying offer. But anything more than 20, I guess I understand if that's what he's looking for, then you're in a tough spot. But really hope they can work something out here.
This is weird with the audio. So I sound good to the people on Twitter Spaces, but you sound good to the people on video. So
yeah, go figure. This is it's not ideal. We're being hijacked by robots, as people are saying in the comments that I'm looking at right now. So
let's end both the video and the Twitter Spaces, and then you and I just finish it up. So